Welcome to Ignite to Impact, a weekly podcast that explores what it takes to make your community, our nation, and the world a better place. You've tuned in to be inspired and enlightened as we pull back the curtain and dive into intimate and energetic conversations with achievers and doers. We are talking with leaders who are in the trenches making phenomenal changes through business, nonprofits, education, and the arts. Our goal? To encourage, motivate, and challenge you to go to the next level in leadership. Now, here's your host, Master Leadership Strategist, Dr. Geneva Williams. So, let's ignite to impact.
Hi, this is Dr. Geneva. Ignite to Impact, and welcome. Hey, we're here once again broadcasting live out of the voiceover production studios with the awesome artiste, Gerald McBride. I am so delighted to be here with him and with you. And so thank you for joining us. And you know, doing these podcasts, these weekly conversations with all of you has really been, frankly, inspirational for me. I learned so much from our guest, those leaders who are making a difference in their community in so many different ways. And I just learned so much, and I'm so delighted and blessed to hear their experiences, hear their stories, hear about the why and how. Well, my guest today is a very special treat for me, and I'll tell you why. I have known this leader for a very long time, many years, and we've done a number of things together. But she's always been one of my sheroes because she has spanned the gamut of experience and leadership. She served as the executive director of City Year Detroit, where over 900 young people helped thousands of Detroit school children, keeping them in school and on track to graduation. She also served for over 17 years as CEO of the Michigan Metro Girl Scout Council. Okay, there's more. She was cited by Crain's Business as the best managed nonprofit. Get that. She was also cited by Crain's as one of Detroit's 100 most influential women. I'm still going on. She received the United Way Executive of the Year Award. She was elected to the Detroit Public Schools Board of Education and has served on numerous nonprofit and civic boards and projects in Detroit, mostly focused on youth education and Detroit's revitalization. So you see this list of things that I keep reading off. She's clearly been in not only a leader, but in leadership roles. So you see why I'm excited to have her. But guess what she does now? Now, she's a full-time volunteer. Check that. As well as an activist for Detroit's transformation and excellent public schools for all our children. So you see why I'm excited. We're talking about someone who has had impact in career and community. So she's the perfect guest for us to learn a lot from in work and in the community. So who have I been talking about? Penny Baylor. Welcome, Penny, to the studio.
Thank you, Geneva. You are awesome. Thank you, my dear, dear friend.
It is so great to have you. And I have to tell you, I've been doing these podcasts now for about 2 years. And I have talked to, leaders from all over the country, locally and nationally. And we've talked a variety of topics about leadership and many different approaches. But you're probably the first guest that I have that brings it full force in both career and community. And you have that wonderful balance, and I really am looking forward to the conversation, because we're going to talk about that, because I've had so many younger leaders, emerging leaders, ask me the question, how do you do it? You know, how do you balance work and life, and how do you still, you know, and then be able to squeeze in some community stuff? So we're going to get to that. So you see why I'm just delighted to have you here.
Well,
but we can talk about those things, can't we?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Geneva.
And so, but we first want to hear about you, Penny Baylor. Tell us what it was like growing up as Penny Baylor.
Well, I grew up as Penny Naylor.
Oh, Penny Naylor.
Okay. Naylor Baylor, isn't that cool?
Yes. So Naylor was your maiden name.
Yes, Naylor, and I married Kermit Baylor, a born and raised Detroiter.
So wait a minute. So it was Penny Naylor Baylor. Oh, I'm telling you.
That doesn't go well on a bumper sticker.
It does. It's priceless.
I love it. I grew up in Atlanta, and I had the great good fortune to have the most wonderful parents. Neither of whom went to college. My daddy was an orphan born in Texas, and my mother's mother died when my mother was just 15 and had to raise all her brothers and sisters. So these were people who had grown up giving back, being leaders, taking charge. And they were the greatest role models because they introduced me to volunteer work, and this was through the Campfire Girls. Ironically, I ended up leading the Girl Scouts here in Detroit, but in Atlanta, there was no Girl Scout troop at my school, but there was a Campfire Girl troop. And Campfire and Girl Scouting are very similar, and they're about achievement and leadership. And so, you know, I still have my honor bead jacket from the Campfire Girls. But in Campfire is where I learned to swim. And as you know, I love swimming, and that's my plan for living to 100 is to keep swimming. And in fact, I last year was amazingly able to make it to the National Senior Olympics.
Yes.
Well, I loved it, so I got to keep doing that and keep swimming. So when I was swimming in Atlanta, I also found out that in Campfire you can learn to swim when you go to camp. Well, my parents didn't have enough money to actually send me to the camp year-round like what I wanted all summer long. But I found out that if I sold Campfire mints, which were kind of like the Girl Scout cookies, for every 200 boxes, I could earn a free week at camp. At Camp Toccoa, this was an overnight camp. So I thought, well, shoot, I can do that. So my mother, these were marketing geniuses. My mother would drive me in Atlanta to the rich neighborhoods and wait in the car, and I had on my little Campfire uniform with my little wagon full of mints, and I would go up these long driveways on West Paces Ferry Road and all that, and I would make my little speech, hello, I'm Penny Naylor, and I'm a Campfire Girl, and for every 200 boxes of mints I sell, I get a free week at Camp Toccoa. Would you like to buy one? They're 50 cents a box. And they'd say, well, I'll just take the whole wagon load. And so then I would go back down to, of course, this was in the days in the 40s and the 50s when it was safe and you could do that sort of thing. You wouldn't do that now. But then my mother would take me to an apartment building, and I would just go up and down all the hallways of the apartment building selling my little mints. Well, it turns out I'm not the queen type, but the only time I was ever the queen of anything is I was the mint queen of Atlanta, Georgia.
Because you sold so many mints,
I did.
right?
I sold 1,087 boxes of mints, but I got 5 free weeks at camp. So this sort of lights a fire in you when you realize, wow, I don't want to say it was easy, but I mean, when you set your mind to do something and you really want something badly enough, and that's the only way you can get it is to, raise the money yourself. My parents just showed me how to do it, and I was willing to do all the work. So that probably was one of the best examples I ever had of you just have to go for things and never give up. So I did that, and I went to camp every summer by doing that sort of thing. But I also learned how to talk to people. My daddy he started as an actor and singer, which ironically is what my son is doing now in New York. But my daddy started out an actor and singer in Texas, and he came to Atlanta. He got on a radio show, and he would write radio shows, very creative, and he would have me come down there and play the piano on radio, and I was just mortified because I didn't like to play and sing at the same time. I remember he made me play the Battle Hymn of the Republic and sing it, and I'm terrible at that, But he got me to where I was comfortable in that sort of a setting, and also because he was in a radio station, because he wanted me to learn these things, and in the selling the mints thing, he would take me to the corporate offices of bank presidents, and you're going to go in there and sell mints to the bank president. And I'm like, I don't want to go into the bank president. I don't know him, and I'm nervous. But I learned how to go in and make a presentation. And this is a great experience. I mean, it's a great learning tool where you go in, you look people in the eye, and you introduce yourselves, and you tell your story. You passionately tell your story, and almost unfailingly, people say, well, I'm just going to buy your whole basket of, your whole wagon full or whatever it is you're selling. So I learned how to do that because that was the only way I could get to my goal, which was to go to camp all summer long. So I think that carried with me a long, long time. And what eventually happened is I ended up after graduate school in Washington, D.C., and it was during the Kennedy administration. And Geneva, when the assassination happened, that was when I was there. I had only been there 3 months, and I was working at HUD in what we call personnel then, which is now human resources. I was recruiting people. It seems like I'm always recruiting somebody to do something. And I decided I had to do something. I was just grief-stricken by all this. And so I called Senator Ted Kennedy's office and went down and to volunteer. And the Kennedy family, Eunice Shriver Kennedy, she was very big on working with handicapped children, disabled children. And so they had a swimming program out in, the suburbs somewhere of Washington. And I had grown up a good swimmer and on the swim team and all that. So I said, well, I would love to help volunteer. And I hadn't really done that much outside of campfire, selling mints and all that sort of thing. Making baby blankets, that sort of where you're not really involved with the person that you're helping. So I went to this swimming pool, and we were teaching children with cerebral palsy and introducing them to the water. So I got in the water, and there was this young teenage young man who had cerebral palsy, but he had never learned to swim. And so I got in, and I was, there were 3 of us, because one of them was helping his arms, and one was helping his legs, and one was holding him up. But when I saw the joy on that young man's face of just being in the water, I think it was transformational. I'd never done anything like that. I had always taught swimming, and but that's just teaching swimming. But helping someone who wouldn't be able to do this any other way unless you were literally holding him up. And I think that's what hooked me into trying to make a difference. And I'm so grateful for that experience. It was the look on his face. It was electrifying. So ever since then, I've always tried to do something that would make a difference. And so as it turned out, I came to Detroit because I married a born and raised Detroiter, a former Tuskegee Airman, someone who had a heroic and an illustrious career of his own. And
so that's when you added the Baylor.
Yes, that's the Penny Naylor Baylor.
Right. Okay.
Came to Detroit in 1975, and we had 2 children, wonderful, glorious children. And I started doing volunteer work because that's just what I do. I mean, he had a good job. He was corporation counsel for the mayor. So I started getting involved in the YWCA. And the one that was downtown, that beautiful National Historic Register building that unfortunately had to be torn down to build Comerica Park. And I was teaching swimming there, and one thing leads to another, and you end up, well, how would you like to be on the board? And, what's a board? I had never been on a board. And I got on the board, and then soon, one thing happens after another, and I'm the chair of the board, and then that puts you on the Metropolitan Board, and then that leads to the Grand Circus Park Neighborhood Board. I mean, one thing leads to another. So what I learned is kind of like selling those mints. When you really want to make a difference, you've got to get involved. And so when I was on the YWCA board, we would go down to the city council. Now, this is when Kenny Cockrell was the city councilman. And I went down because we were lobbying the city council to start for money to do a domestic violence shelter at the YWCA, which we eventually did, interim house. And we were down there, and I was watching the city council members, and I thought, I would love to do that. I would love to, because I could see how you could make an even bigger impact. So I decided to run for office. Now, no one in my family has ever run for office. I had never run for office. I had never even contemplated such a thing. But I decided to do it. And so kind of like that spirit that my parents inspired me of get involved, go for it. If you want to go to camp, you got to earn your way. You know, you want to make a difference, you got to run for office. So I remember running for office the first time. That was in 1981, and I did make it through the primary, but I didn't win the general election, obviously. But it was sort of lit a spark. If you want to make a difference, you've got to take risk. And I remember people saying to me, "How could you do that? How would you know you might not win?" I said, "But if you're going to be on the city council, you have to run. You don't just volunteer for this." And that's kind of the what's propelled me to keep reaching for more. Is if you want something, you have to go for it
and just take
the risk, because if you fail, at least you tried, and you learned something in that. I went to, I think, every single one of the 139 square miles in Detroit, because then the city council races were citywide. I learned so much. Marion Mahaffey was my role model, and she and her husband came over to my house, and they brought this big 3-ring binder. It was about a foot thick, and it says how to run for office. And I'm like, oh my goodness. She was such a great mentor.
Yes, very much.
She was such an inspiration. And this was in the days with Marion Mahaffey and Irma Henderson. I mean, this was really iconic, especially
and of course
women.
these are women role models that you're mentioning. Were they, the Marion Mahaffey, Irma Henderson, were they your role models, or were there other women who inspired you?
Anyway, Joanne Watson. Joanne Watson was at the time, she was actually we had a search committee. I was on the board of the YWCA and became the chair of the board, and we had a vacancy as our executive director. And she was at the NAACP at the time, and I was so impressed with her, and we hired her as the executive director, and I was her partner as the board chair. And we are still close because of that opportunity, because that's where we started Interim House, the shelter for battered women. So when you meet someone who can be your partner, I mean, that's really important too in accomplishing the same goal. So that's where I sort of got involved in the issues of women and girls, and eventually somebody indicated that the position was open. Oh, I know what it was. It was Jackie Washington, my dear friend, and she and I were on the YWCA board together. And so she called me one night. I remember I was standing in the kitchen with Kermit, and she says, "Penny, I want to talk to you about something." She said, "We're looking for a CEO of the Girl Scouts." And I thought she was going to say, "So who would you recommend?" And she said, "We put an ad out, and we got about 100 applications, but the people that applied were not what we were looking for. So we decided we were going to go out and ask the people who should have applied to apply. And so I'm calling you to ask if you would apply to be the CEO of the Girl Scouts." And I'm like, "What?" I was a campfire girl. I wasn't a girl. And she said, "Well, don't worry about that, But by this time, I had met a lot of people, and I was involved in the YWCA. We started the domestic violence shelter. I had run for city council. And they wanted the Girl Scouts to get more visibility. They had a fine organization. It was extremely well run. And you were at United Way and UCS. You knew that. And it needed to be more visible. In fact, at the time I went there, I did get the job, as it turns out. And at the time I went there, we had 21,000 girls, but only 1,000 were in the city. 20,000 were in the suburbs. And we had most of Oakland and Wayne County. And so by the time I left, we had 43,000 girls, and 20,000 were in the city.
So, I want to, you've given us so much as you talk about, one thing led to another. Well, I want to hear a little bit about what did you do? One thing led to another. You talk about it just so easily, and this is how it happened, and almost like you just fell into leadership. But I know it doesn't work like that.
No, it doesn't work.
It doesn't. So okay, let's take one example. How were you able to get the results of increased membership at the Girl Scouts?
Well, first
for
of
example,
all, you have to have a great team.
Okay.
A great team.
All right.
You have to have people who are as impassioned as you are to get this job done. And I was very fortunate that was my goal, is to find the great partners in the key jobs and throughout the organization to make this happen.
Okay.
And I think you just have to demonstrate, because it's kind of contagious when you demonstrate passion. Because I knew that we could really make a difference in the lives of girls. And when I saw that the membership was so low in the city of Detroit, where our need was so tremendous, I thought, well, that's not right. So, but I had to be careful, because the strength of the organization lies in its volunteers, and the vast majority of the volunteers were not Detroiters. So we have to build up one piece where you're nurturing the other. You have to build a partnership where people will trust you and where people will know this is for everybody. This is for all the girls. And so we started something that was actually pretty controversial at the time. We had mandatory training for the troop leaders, and in the beginning, troop leaders would go to training, or maybe they had been a Girl Scout all their lives, so they didn't feel they needed any training. But I realized on the issue of diversity that this is something that not everyone has experienced, or that not everyone understands. And so we tried to figure out, okay, how are we going to get across this concept of the beauty of diversity and how it enhances everyone's life, unless we make training mandatory. And then we inserted a little small 1 hour segment of an 8-hour day of training about diversity. We had a video that showed, I think it was the blue-eyed and the brown-eyed video, which was years ago, the one that was so illustrative. So that began to help, and then one thing led to another, and then we finally made diversity training itself a full day of mandatory training. And I'll never forget, Geneva, and you've been on twice as many boards as I have. At the board meeting where I introduced this, that we had this, and we had it developed by the University of Michigan, so this was totally well done, beautifully done. And there were 3 volunteers who were sitting on the board, and they said, "You're going to lose leaders because of this." And this just came out of my mouth. I don't know where it said, "If I lose them for this, I don't want them." And they were shocked. But it's the truth. It just came out of my heart. If someone would refuse to be a Girl Scout leader because they were required to embrace diversity, then that's not the right person to be leading young girls.
And so, you know what? So I want to just really...
You've been listening to Ignite to Impact. Your host is Dr. Geneva Williams, an award-winning executive, facilitator, and master leadership strategist. Dr. Geneva is dedicated to inspiring others to get their leadership on and equipping the next generation with leadership tools and tips to help make the world a better place. Sign up to download Dr. Geneva's mini ebook on leadership. Get the show notes, links, and other resources at drgenevaspeaks.com. That's drgenevaspeaks.com. Thanks for listening. Please share the podcast to those in your community via Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, or Google+, and leave us a 5-star review in iTunes. When you do that, it helps others find the podcast easier. Send your questions or comments to info@drgenevaspeaks.com.